When the United States of America declared its independence in 1776 and set out to establish a new constitutional republic, the founders drew upon Enlightenment ideals that had inspired revolutionary thinking across the Western world. Their vision was to create a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, one designed to secure the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To achieve this, they embraced philosophies like popular sovereignty, the rule of law, separation of powers, and checks and balances. These core tenets provided the foundation for the U.S. Constitution and continue shaping America's constitutional democracy to this day. Popular sovereignty. At the heart of American democracy lies the principle of popular sovereignty, the idea that the power to govern lies with the people, who can choose their own representatives and leaders. This flew in the face of monarchical rule, where power derived from hereditary sovereignty. The Declaration of Independence embodied popular sovereignty by stating, "Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." The Constitution further enshrined this by establishing methods for the people to directly elect the House of Representatives and indirectly the President and Senate. While imperfect at first by restricting the rights of women, slaves, and others, popular sovereignty set America on a democratic course to gradually expand voting rights and representation to all citizens over time. Rule of law. Allied to popular sovereignty is the rule of law, the principle that all members of society, including government itself, are equally subject to publicly accepted laws. This contrasted with the arbitrary exercise of power by elites or monarchs. The founders saw the rule of law as vital for safeguarding citizens' rights and preventing governmental oppression. As John Adams said, "A government of laws and not of men." To uphold rule of law, the Constitution established an independent judiciary headed by the Supreme Court as final arbiter of the Constitution and laws of the land. It also explicitly prohibited government from depriving citizens of life, liberty, or property without due process. Separation of powers. To prevent any one group or faction from becoming too powerful, the Constitution divided governmental power among three co-equal branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Each had defined spheres of authority and independence from the others. As James Madison wrote in the Federalist Papers, this separation aimed to render the usurpation of powers by either branch truly difficult. The Bill of Rights further restricted the federal government's power over citizens. Checks and balances. While powers were separated, the branches were not fully independent, but rather kept in balance by a system of institutional controls. This enabled each branch to check and balance against the potential excesses of the others. For example, the president appoints judges and executes laws, but can be overridden by Congress and removed from office by impeachment. Congress legislates, but the president can veto laws, and the Supreme Court can strike them down as unconstitutional. Federalism and division of powers. A final key principle was to create a federal system where both national and state governments coexisted with divided yet interlocking powers. This avoided concentrating too much authority in one place while giving states local control befitting their diversity. The national government was granted expressed or enumerated powers, like regulating interstate commerce or providing for the common defense, but the 10th Amendment explicitly reserved all other powers to the states or the people. States thus wielded reserve powers over areas like establishing local governments, holding elections, and overseeing education, law enforcement, and other public services. Both federal and state governments also shared concurrent powers in areas like taxation. This division of sovereignty not only checked concentrations of power, but reflected the founders' view that people's rights and liberties were best protected by multiple levels of democratically elected government. Of course, no system of government can be perfect or immutable. so the Constitution provided avenues for reforms and interpretation to ensure its principles could endure for generations. Constitutional amendments. To adapt to changing national needs and values, the Constitution outlines a multi-step amendment process. Though intentionally difficult, 27 amendments have been ratified by Congress and the states. These include seminal changes, like the Bill of Rights protecting fundamental freedoms, and amendments extending the right to vote to all races, women, Native Americans, Washington, D.C. residents, and 18-year-olds. Amendments have also restructured executive powers, limited terms of office, outlawed poll taxes, and more. Role of the Supreme Court. While the Constitution cannot predict every future legal issue, it grants the Supreme Court the power to serve as its final interpreter. Through its rulings, the court aims to faithfully uphold the Constitution's principles, while also allowing its meaning to evolve with society. For example, the Equal Protection Clause has been applied not just to racial discrimination, but gender, disability, and eventually sexual orientation as new civil rights emerged. Other decisions have shaped free speech protections, defined federal versus state powers, expanded or limited executive authorities. Though not without controversy, the court plays a key role in mediating tensions between original intent and changing national circumstances, ensuring the Constitution remains a living civic framework. Civic participation. Finally, while government institutions uphold constitutional principles, the ultimate responsibility for safeguarding democracy lies with citizens themselves through active civic participation. The founders intended Americans to remain educated, engaged observers of their institutions and processes. As Benjamin Franklin said upon the Constitution's ratification, "A republic if you can keep it." Citizens fulfill this duty by exercising their voting rights, holding leaders accountable, petitioning government, serving in juries, and participating in civic organizations. An informed, vigilant citizenry is the last line of protecting constitutional values like liberty and popular sovereignty from backsliding. From laying out the fundamental purposes of government to structuring the institutions and processes that prevent abuses of power, the U.S. Constitution remains a pioneering blueprint for preserving democratic self-governance. While imperfect and requiring regular reinterpretation and reform, its founding principles like popular sovereignty, rule of law, separation of powers, and checks and balances have proven durable. They not only shaped America's development, but have inspired freedom movements and democracies around the world for over 2 centuries. So long as citizens remain engaged in their government and protective of these principles, America's experiment in constitutional democracy has opportunity to thrive long into the future.